Hey guys, Michael here, and today I'll be covering 3 different powerful verbal Jui-Jitsu techniques that you can use when interacting with people. First of all, these techniques are all predicated on the ability to be non-reactive and make calculated responses. A reaction is an involuntary retort to a stimulus, while response is a coordinated and thought-out maneuver. That is, basically you have to never become too emotional in an interaction. You should never match anger with anger if a person's angry. If they're being judgmental about you, you shouldn't just jump into being judgmental back towards them. And if they're being negative, you shouldn't fall into negativity yourself. And when people are acting this way, often the best response is to have no reaction at all to it. And this brings us to our first technique. The first technique is, don't acknowledge what a person says and or change the subject. This is very good technique if you come across aggressive people, for example, like if there's someone who's a little bit drunk on the street and is looking for a fight at night. What works really well in this situation, and I've used this technique myself, when the person comes up to you and is like, hey buddy, what you looking at? What you doing? You know, they don't really care for what your response is, right? They're just looking for any reason to escalate and for you to give them any reason to, pound you. So what I find works really well is if they're wearing a t-shirt, and for example, if the t-shirt has a band name on it, like Metallica, or a sports team, like New England Patriots or something, to instead of responding negatively, instead of responding fearfully, instead just be like, hey man, you like Metallica? Me too. What's your favorite album? Like, this completely throws these people off, at least half the time, where they're coming in with negativity, they're expecting negativity back, and then boom, you counter with a positive question about something they're actually interested in. And a lot of time they're like, yeah, I do. I like this album. I'm like, oh, me too. That's cool. Well, I gotta go. Have a great night. And then get out of the situation. This type of response is a great way of disarming people, because you send their brain in a completely different direction while injecting like a more pleasant, positive emotion into the interaction. Another example would be is maybe you go up and you want to start a conversation with a group of girls at the bar. But you go up and they respond with something snide or negative, or just maybe they just completely ignore you. Now, love and hate are really like two sides of the same coin. The real opposite of not liking someone is being indifferent to them. So it's actually much easier to build off of and turn around a negative response than if someone's just completely indifferent to you and ignoring you. I mean, for example, you'll see couples who are fighting all the time, right? But they fight, they break up, they make up, they get back together, but you rarely ever see a person who gets indifferent, a couple who becomes indifferent to one another and gets back together. Anyway, either way, if the person's response is negative or indifferent, not initially reacting back negative way yourself is normally the best. And can be a hard thing to do, because most people, when they feel rejected, they feel hurt or they feel slighted, they become negative themselves and they project this back to the other people. And when you feel that feeling inside you, they're just going to feel it back, and they were already feeling it somewhat, and it just feeds off each other in a cycle of negativity. And this just puts the final nail in the coffin for any hope that the conversation might have had. So if you don't react back negatively, you communicate that your self-esteem is not tied to the other person's approval. And this also removes a pressure or a burden that you put on them where they might feel that they're responsible for your emotions, right? Like, people don't want you to go up and like, oh man, if I say something mean, this guy's going to get upset and then it could be weird and awkward. There's so much pressure on me. But if you show you're not like, your reactions aren't dependent on their reactions, this takes a great negative weight off their shoulders and makes them more relaxed and more open to speaking with you. Also, by holding a strong frame where you're not reacting to any negativity that they might throw at you, this really communicates that you really might just be a real cool social guy who just wants to talk and meet people and chat with them, and that maybe a negative response from them is so outside of your reality that you don't even register what they said. And in this case, they might feel like they might have initially misjudged you and be curious to discover what makes you so confident that you don't seem upset that they're not greeting you with open arms. This is one actually of the top epiphanies I ever had when it came to improving my social skills. People always ask me, what are the top moments along your journey where you had a real aha moment in your brain. And I remember the first one, of course, was just learning that learning social skills is actually possible, where I read a book and I employed a few of the techniques and I got amazing results that evening. And part of the reason was just because I was taking action and having something, oh, I guess I do this. That was half of it wasn't even the techniques, but just the fact that I was willing to put myself out there. But yeah, that discovery that it's possible through practice to improve social skills, that was number one. But the second big epiphany was when I discovered it was actually possible to turn around a negative conversation. I remember I went up to a group of 4 girls sitting at a table, and I tried to start a conversation, and none of them would even look at me, just completely ignoring me. And it felt like 2 hours, but it was probably more like 30 seconds to 2 minutes. I just kept pushing through it, being positive, keep talking. Finally, I landed some joke that probably worked. And within 5 minutes, they asked if I wanted to sit with them. And it was amazing to me that I had the ability where I felt like I went from this initial really like slap in the face rejection, complete awkwardness, standing there alone, and using techniques and skills, I was able within a few minutes to completely turn it around and get invited to sit with them. And that to me was just another really defining moment I remember along my journey. All right, so technique number 2. This is to purposely misunderstand and or reinterpret something to your benefit or in a comedic way. This is something the president does quite often. And this shows that you don't fall into the trap of having to give logical responses to what might be illogical questions, or just to questions that you don't feel like answering. So what the president does often is he'll be at like a press conference and a reporter will ask, Mr. President, how could you say A, B, C, D negative things about this person? And he would say, excuse me, did you just say this person was A, B, C, D? Oh, that's terrible. I would never say that about that person. I can't believe you said that. That's terrible, that's terrible. And then he moves on. Yeah, it's kind of childish, but it works. Another example, like when you just want to misinterpret, is someone could come up to you and be like, hey, those shoes look pretty cheap, right? They're dissing your shoes. But you can respond, not only are they cheap, but they're also super comfortable, right? You're misinterpreting their diss as a positive and adding to it and showing that you're not reacting to them or falling into their frame of how they're viewing you. And finally, the third technique you can use is known as cutting threads. A thread is a topic of conversation, right? Normally when you're talking to a person or in a group of people, there's actually multiple conversations going on at once. There's a central main conversation, and then there's side stories, you break off, you tell them, and then you get back to the main topic, right? All those are different threads of conversation. And to cut a thread means that you're willing to inject a hard stop into the conversation with regards to a specific topic and then redirect the conversation elsewhere. Thread cutting really shows like dominance, authority, and that you're willing to lead a conversation. And you're not in a paradigm where you are responding to other person's every question in an attempt to try to make them like you. Imagine you're like a CEO in a boardroom and they're discussing something that doesn't interest you, but you're the authority in that information. If you want to cut them off and move to something that you think is more important, then you have the power to do so. It also sets up the frame where you're evaluating the other person instead of them evaluating you, and this is always a better frame to be in. You can use this technique positively for good or for evil, let's say. You can give a compliment and then bury it under more talk before the person has a chance to respond to it, maybe not even get a thank you. And when you do this, it makes the compliment seem a lot more authentic and less like a transaction where you're just looking for a positive response. By just continue speaking, you're not even requiring the person to respond back. So this is like giving a gift and not expecting anything back. For example, you can tell a girl, oh, I really like your dress. You look really pretty today. Anyway, how did you finish last night's homework? Right? You've given a compliment, but you've moved the conversation on before they've had a chance to respond. So it's a completely give without trying to take. However, you can also use this technique in a more manipulative way, where you purposely cut threads to prevent another person from ever reaching an emotional catharsis on a topic. And when this is repeatedly done many times in a row, it's a concept called stacking. So basically, by making statements and then repeatedly changing the topic before a person has a chance to properly respond to them, you can quickly build up strong emotions inside them from all the stacked smaller emotions that they feel that they never get a chance to express. This is kind of a very advanced topic or technique, but it can be used. And when it's used, it's usually in a more manipulative type of way. You can also purposely misinterpret what other people's responses are, and this can result them in becoming even more flustered when they try to correct what they perceive as your inaccurate interpretation of what they said. And this, when they're trying to correct themselves, this is an act of qualifying themselves to you. And an act of qualifying is a form of investment into you. You're building up all this investment into you, which you could then cash out later. I go into great depth about the concept of qualifying yourself in my Enhanced EQ online video course. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, you can just click the link in the description below. Like I said before, a person who effectively can employ such a technique, they normally know what they're doing, and it's most likely they're manipulating the other person to get them to invest in them and want their validation, so they can build that up and then use it and cash it in later to get something back from them. So like any tool, thread cutting can be used both positively or negatively. It can be used to really give an altruistic compliment to a person where they don't feel like they need to give anything back in response, or it can be used in a more Machiavellian way where you build up emotions in person really high just so you can take something from them later. To recap, the 3 techniques that I discussed was 1, don't acknowledge something and or change the subject. 2, purposely misunderstand, reinterpret, or reframe something. And 3, cutting threads. So this concludes this video. I hope you learned something. Until next time, ciao.